Today is lesson 5 of advanced server-side scripting with Mean. So let's have a look at what we're doing today. Those of you who did sign up for the Azure certification, I'm going to also finalize the test date. It will likely be, I think we're looking at Friday, March the 4th, so the Friday of reading week. So that would be 3 weeks today. And I think we're looking at around 10 or 10:30 a.m. So I will be sending you an email with those details. So you have 3 more weeks to study and prepare for your Azure 900 fundamentals exam. I know there are some people in the class that have signed up for it. So I'll send out confirmation around the test date and time, but it looks like 3 weeks today. It would help if I don't leave the course. I was already in. Okay. What are we doing today? Lesson 5. So what we want to do for starters today is we're going to look at deploying our Node and Express site that we've built so far. We're going to deploy it to a cloud service called Heroku. Heroku is owned by a big tech company in Silicon Valley called Salesforce. They make one of the world's largest customer relationship management packages. And they have a service. Heroku lets us host up to 5 sites for free. And unlike with our experience with Microsoft Azure, there's no credit, so there's no expiry. We can run them on a subdomain of herokuapp.com, basically indefinitely. So we'll do that first. We'll take the job tracker as we've built it so far. We'll look at deploying it to Heroku. Then we're going to talk about NoSQL databases. So this is a very different kind of database from the ones we've been working with in the past. We've always worked with relational databases, MySQL and SQL Server. So NoSQL databases have become a lot more popular, much more common. And we're going to kind of compare and contrast. And then we are going to set up, excuse me, with the MongoDB cloud service. So MongoDB is probably the world's most popular NoSQL or non-relational database. We're going to get it set up, and then we're going to look at using models with an NPM package called Mongoose. So Mongoose is kind of the library. It's like the entity framework in ASP.NET. It was the library that lets our web application talk to the database. Well, Mongoose is an NPM package that lets our Node web application talk to a MongoDB database. And then we can start implementing create, read, update, delete functionality in our job tracker. We just hard-coded in some employers last week. We want to move those to MongoDB and be able to read and create new employers in the database and have those display in our application. Then next week, we'll kind of continue on, and we can, we're not going to get all of the create, read, update, delete done today. That's fine. I've allocated 2 classes, so we shouldn't need to go too fast through that. So our first step to deploy our application is to go and sign up for an account at Heroku. Fortunately, the Heroku process and the dashboard, it's very simple. It's very much scaled down. It's not nearly as overwhelming as what you see from Microsoft Azure. So in the lesson 5 folder, you can just click the link to go to Heroku, and the sign up form is very brief. Just put in your name. You do not have to put in a company name. And this form, when you click the create free account, it will just send a confirmation email to whatever email you provide. So you'll need to jump into your inbox and just click that confirmation. Now, Microsoft Azure, it does support hosting of Node sites, but probably not many of us have credits left from last semester. And also the process for hosting Node on Azure is a little more complex. I've put up a quick tutorial here. There's a couple links on how to do it if you're interested, but I find Heroku is easier, and I think it's nice to get exposure to some different tools, so I will encourage you to use Heroku. And then we're going to deploy our job tracker today. It's quite simple, the process, and then you can use this same process to deploy your portfolio site. So you get 5 free sites on Heroku, so you'll be able to deploy the job tracker and your portfolio and still have room to deploy 3 other sites here in your free account. So I'm just going to sign in to my account. And go to my Authenticator app. So you can expect 2-factor authentication. And here is your Heroku dashboard. Maybe give me a thumbs up once you are once you've signed up and verified your account, you should get a page that looks like this one. I'll just pause the recording for a moment. Okay, so we've registered for our Heroku account. We get into the dashboard, and then we will create a new application. But before we do, we want to go to GitHub and make sure that our job tracker code is deployed to GitHub, because we're going to use the CI/CD pipeline, the continuous integration, continuous deployment. Now, you may have created a job tracker application already. I don't know, a repository. If you have, you don't need to do it again, but you can just, if you do not have this code on GitHub, you can make a job tracker repository, make it private. Don't include any README, git ignore. You just want an empty repository. So you're going to create it. And then you'll need to either use your GitHub desktop or your version control commands inside of your code editor, or you can use the good old terminal to initialize Git. And you should also have this the git ignore file for Node in your project as well. Oh, that's why it didn't work, because mine is inside of views, so I need to move it. I wondered why my Node modules got uploaded. They weren't supposed to. I'm going to move that file. Okay, if you don't have git ignore, the git ignore file for Node is on Blackboard. So I will show you where to get it. Inside of the weekly learning tools and resources, there's a link to it here. So if you don't have it, you can go into tools and resources. All the way down at the bottom, the very last item is the git ignore file for Node project. So if you click on it and click on raw, I can put the direct link right in the chat. You can save this file, but make sure you just call it .gitignore, and you can save it to the root of your job tracker project. I foolishly saved it, but I saved it in my views folder instead of, it should go in the root folder. So then you can run your regular Git commands. If you need them, they're here as well on Blackboard. Although I'm sure by now most of you are probably pretty comfortable with being able to upload a project to GitHub. But the commands are here if you need them. I've made a change. I've moved my git ignore file out of the views folder where it wasn't supposed to be. I've moved it into my root. So I'm actually going to make a new commit and push as well. I'm going to add my files. moved git ignore to root. And then I'm going to push. Now, if you properly put the git ignore in the root, like I was supposed to, the node modules should not be included. I'm going to fix this briefly. What I can do, if I delete my node modules folder in my local project, commit to GitHub, and then if I just run the npm install command, it will restore my node modules locally, but not to GitHub. So I'm going to try that. You don't have to do this. This is just because I did mine wrong. So I'm going to delete node modules. It's probably too late. I'm going to break my project. No, I won't bother. But if you check your repository, node modules is probably not here. If you've got the correct git ignore file in the root, one of the things that's ignored in here should be the node modules folder. So you shouldn't have the node modules show up in your repository. They don't need to be there. Does anybody need more time to get your project up on GitHub, or are we okay?
How can I put it up on, how can I put the job tracker up on GitHub? I forgot.
Okay, all the commands are right here.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Right, so you initialize the repository locally, add your files and commit them, and then you just follow those commands.
Okay.
Once your project is on GitHub, then you can go back to your tab with Heroku. And as several of you have already figured out, we'll use this create new app option. We will give it a name. The name has to be unique, so we can't all call our site job tracker. So I'll call mine the RF job tracker, which is available. Give it a name. I'll just leave the region as the United States because there's only two options, US and Europe. Obviously, we're closer to the US. So give it a unique name and click Create App. And the option that we need now that we have our new app. So my site is actually running. I can go to it. If I just go to, we can see kind of like the splash page. If I go to rfjobtracker.heroku app, so that's going to be the subdomain for all our sites, just brings up this kind of like simple HTML page. And it does support HTTPS. There's a wildcard SSL certificate on Heroku app, so all our pages will show as secure. So which option do you think we need to pick now? How are we going to set up continuous deployment from our job tracker repository? Actually, I guess we could, Tanya. That would be one option. This is a little more advanced for connecting multiple applications together and linking code. So even simpler. Yep, right here in the deployment method section on the main page, right in the middle, we've got GitHub. So we'll just click on that. Now, I've used Heroku, so I'm already logged into my GitHub account. You can see there's my little GitHub avatar. It has my GitHub username. When you click connect to GitHub, should get a pop-up window asking you to sign in to your GitHub account. So just complete that authentication with your GitHub username and password. And then you can just type your repository name. And search for it. Finds my repository here with my GitHub username and my repository name, and then there's just a simple connect button. So it's now connected. It asks, do I want to enable automatic deployment so every push will automatically deploy a new version of the app? So yes, we want this to happen. And then it asks which branch. We looked at branching on Wednesday, right? So typically we use the master or the main branch for production. And then I'll just click this gray enable automatic deploys. So automatic deployment is enabled. And now I just want to start this, to initialize this, I'll click this second deploy branch button down here. So I really like the way the Heroku dashboard, it's nice and clean. There are not an overwhelming number of options. And they've made all of these processes really simple. So it's going and fetching, it's building, and it's already deployed. We get a green check mark, and now we've got a little button here to just open the site. So here's our job tracker. So this process that we just went through, it's exactly what you need to do to deploy your portfolio. You don't need a database for the portfolio. All you have to do is put your code up on GitHub, create a new app on Heroku, connect it to the repository, and you can enable automatic deployment and click the deploy button. That's it. Okay, so now our job tracker site, we can load the about view. I can load the employers view. And we've got our little bootstrap nav bar showing up. And much like in the Azure portal, if we want to see the history of the deployments, if we go to the activity, and this lets us roll back, if we break something, we can redeploy an earlier version. If we want. So I really like this portal. I think it's really quite easy to use. We can also invite collaborators if you're working with someone else that we can share and have access to the same project. Okay, does anybody have any questions about this Heroku deployment? We won't do a lot more in here today, but we will do one thing in terms of once we get our database set up and we redeploy our job tracker, we want to use the Heroku dashboard to securely store our database credentials. I mean, we can easily just put them in our application code. That's not really recommended. There's a particular way we should be doing this that we're going to look at. Are there any questions about our deployment before we kind of move on and start diving into NoSQL and MongoDB? Okay, go. By all means, do what you need to do. Okay. So if you're interested, as I said, if you're interested in looking at the process of how the deployment works with Node and Azure, similar, but I've put a couple links here. So here's what I want you to do. I'm going to give you 2 short videos to watch. Okay, so I'll pause the recording. Here's the first video. Each of them is like 3 minutes long. I've got a link to a spreadsheet here on OneDrive. So you can just open up this link. First of all, keep it open in your browser. So there's 2 columns. There's a relational database column and a NoSQL database column. So as you watch this first video, we'll see how long it is, and you can just watch it on your own. Yeah, it's not long, minute and a half. As you watch it, I want you to think about what are the differences between the relational databases that we've used before and a NoSQL database that we're about to start using. And you can list them and just add to this spreadsheet anything you note from the video. Yeah, okay, it's I don't know why I got Portuguese, closed captions, but okay, so 2 minutes, watch the video, I'll pause the recording, and note any differences between relational and NoSQL databases in the spreadsheet. Okay, it's just a shared spreadsheet, we'll all work in it together. Okay, and give me a thumbs up when you're done. Okay, I'm seeing some good answers in our spreadsheet. Also, could somebody add a note? What did they say in the video? They said something about schemas or structure. So what is the difference in how data is structured in a relational database from a NoSQL database? Yeah, we use traditional SQL tables and syntax. Speed becomes an issue when our relational databases get really large. So best handled with kind of moderate amounts of data. Very versatile. We can use relational databases, and this is obviously one of the key ones. We typically use structured query language or SQL to manipulate the database and also to perform create, read, update, and delete operations. So how do NoSQL databases compare? Yeah, our data is stored as JSON documents, which means it's better for scaling when we have a site with an application with many users collecting lots of data. So think about, here's a good example. Well, actually, I'll ask you for some examples in a minute. So we use them typically for large data. Obviously, they're specialized, and we do not need to use SQL commands. We use much simpler commands when we're working with NoSQL databases. Did anybody notice what they said about the schema or the database structure and how it's different in a relational database and a NoSQL database? Yep. Okay, NoSQL uses sharding. Bit of an advanced topic. We probably won't get into sharding, but that's true. So in relational database, I'm going to add this one myself. The tables must have a predefined schema. So schema list, that means a couple of things. What do you think, or could somebody explain what this difference would mean? So we have to define a table schema in a relational database, but in a NoSQL database, we do not. So what do you suppose that means? This is a critical difference to understand. Any ideas when I say a schema, a table has to have a schema in a relational database? How, in just in everyday language, what does that mean? Think about the last time you created a table in a relational database. What things did you do to create that table? Yep, that's true, Chris. Yeah, that's right. We have to set up a structure, right? So let's say we're going to build an employers table in a relational database. We would need to figure out what are the column names and what are the data types for each column, right? What does an employer record look like? Do we have a name? Do we have an address? Do we have a phone number? Do we have an image of their logo or a geolocation, right? So every employer would fit that same schema. NoSQL databases are schema-less. That's right, Raf. It's a logical configuration of how's that data organized in a table. In a NoSQL database, our data is actually schema-less. So we can save employers to the database, even if there is not yet any table. We don't even use the word table in NoSQL vocabulary. Even if we don't have a table yet, we can just start putting employer data in. And the data for one employer, it can have a different structure from the data for another employer. Every employer is simply a JSON object. So some employers could have a field called address, and others might just have, let's say, a longitude and latitude, like GPS coordinates. So they don't have to use the same structure in the database, which I know sounds kind of weird. It's very different from the way we've been working with databases as long as you've been here in the program. So given these differences, can you think of any use cases? Like when would a NoSQL, what kind of application or what's a scenario, or even think of a website you use or an app you use where you think maybe there's a NoSQL database being used instead of the traditional relational database? Where would we have huge amounts of data? Okay, something like Discord could be something like Facebook. Yep. Maybe Amazon may be a little too complex of a site, but could be. Think of an app you use that has huge volumes of transactions, but where the data is actually fairly simple, like not super complicated. But the volume of data is massive. Okay, Twitter's a good one, right? Twitter's fairly simple because really the only data are basically the users, the posts, and the media. But yeah, the volume. Okay, yeah, fantasy sports, keeping track, absolutely. Think every Sunday in the NFL, how many records they've got to record of the player statistics. Anybody order takeout recently? Search sites work a little differently. They use indexes. Okay, so Colton, which service did you use for takeout? Did you order from a delivery service? Yeah, from something like Skip the Dishes, right? There's very, very high volumes of transactions and data, so it needs to scale really well. But the actual application, the data model is not that complicated, is it? You got restaurants, you got dishes, you got customers, you got orders, you got delivery drivers. That's it. Like it's not that complex of an application, but it's the volume. Or just to give you another example of a project that I was working on with some students over the last few years, we were working with a manufacturer, and what they built was they built smart manufacturing facilities. So everything, all the fans, all the doors, all the devices had Internet of Things. They had sensors, and they were constantly reporting like every minute on the temperature, the pressure, the humidity in the environment. So the data was simple, but they needed to capture that data in massive amounts, every 5 seconds, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Even though the data was simple, the volume of data and the growth of it was massive. So it was simple data, so we could store it in a NoSQL database just as JSON objects. That every 5 seconds we could survey the whole facility and we could get a report from every area, every door, every fan, what was the environment like, because it had to be very controlled. So those are the kinds of fits where we might see a NoSQL database being used, right? Capturing very high volumes of data, but the data is not typically that complex. And it takes a little while. So there's a lot of flexibility. It takes a little while to get our head around using NoSQL databases. So I got one other quick video for you. I think this one is 3 minutes. So this one is specifically, it's a promotional video for MongoDB. I want you to watch it and then just use the chat and tell me why use MongoDB. Like I said 3 benefits, but just list one. Use the chat and put one benefit in the chat about using MongoDB. So that's that second video link here. So give it a quick watch and tell me what's good about MongoDB specifically. We'll come back in 3 minutes. Okay, so far what we've found is we can do things like geospatial queries, so we can pull from particular coordinates. Yep. Chris says the query complexity can vary. We can do simple data display, which is what we're doing, but all the way up to complex calculations. Ralph mentions the speed. Yeah, we don't need to do joins. So NoSQL databases has some different ways we can handle related data, and we'll talk about those after a break. Yeah, Matt also mentioned geospatial queries, right? We can find things within a certain geographic area, right? Like show me all of the sushi restaurants within 10 kilometers of where I am, for example, okay? So MongoDB, it's not the only, there are a number of other and growing list of NoSQL or non-relational databases on the market. MongoDB is still, it's one of the oldest and still probably, I think it's still the most widely used NoSQL database. I know actually a graduate of our program has been working at a company called CouchDB for several years now. That's one of the other big NoSQL databases. Yeah, thanks, Matt. It breaks data into collections so we can easily query them. So we're not going to use the word table in this class. We're going to use the word collection. So a collection, it's a container of data. It holds a bunch of data like tables do, but those collections don't have a predefined structure. And we can query them, yeah, really easily. The data is in JSON format. It's actually in a form of JSON called Bison, binary JSON, which means, yeah, we get fast load times when we're doing queries. Okay, if there's anything else that you think of, or if you're a little late watching the video, feel free to add to the chat. What we'll do, it's 9:51. Let's take a break here. We'll take a 10-minute pause. I'm going to step away. When we come back, I'm going to give you my own little brief overview specifically of MongoDB, and then we will sign up for MongoDB, set up a database, and start integrating it into our website. Okay. Let's take 10.